It's always a bit of a surprise and a great adventure with Anand Varma. So Anand is a photographer for National Geographic who's specialized in photographing the hidden wonders of our world, which is exactly what he's going to talk about. So I'm going to bring Anand up and get him ready to go because I know we're all excited to see what he's got in store for us. Hey, Anand, how are you doing?
Hey, Wes. I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing very well. Excited to hear about your latest work and what's going on. Where are you coming to us from?
I am in my garage in Berkeley, California.
So the garage, why are you in the garage? Is that just like best, Wi-Fi signal or?
A couple of the rest of my usable Zoom spaces or virtual spaces are being used to be taught. There's a science class being taught in one, and other lectures happening in others. So I'm relegated to the garage. That's the only place that I'm allowed to be at the moment.
Well, we're glad that you're able to join us and found that space to share your story with us. So if you want to bring up any slides or anything you have up, we'll get that queued up and ready and bring it in for you.
Great. And I'm going to, let's see here. So just to give you a heads up, yep. There's 3 videos here that the audio is not playing, and so I think Joe Grabowski is gonna help out and throw to a link that has the audio that I'll speak over. We'll try that out. If not, we'll just run the videos in my presentation.
I'm always keen to try something new and make sure we make it work. It's always that's live, proof that it's live right here. You've got Anand working in, coming in from the garage, which don't let him fool you. That garage is actually really tricked out. He's not.
We'll see if we have a couple minutes at the end. I'll give a little bit of a behind the scenes tour here. So if I hit play on this, can you see a picture of a hummingbird?
I can see a picture of a hummingbird. Going to bring it up, and there it is. We've got this beautiful hummingbird that Anand's going to tell us all about, and I will try my best to make sure that if there's any links for videos, we get those queued up. But I'm going to turn it over to you, Anand, to share, what it is that you do with all of us.
All right, perfect. Thanks so much, Wes. So I love what Amy just said about wonder, and that's really going to be the focus of my presentation today. I'm talking really about how I have found photography as to be the perfect tool for me to explore and share this sense of wonder with the natural world. And just to give you a brief background about kind of how I landed here, I started out as a kid who loved animals, and I never really envisioned myself as a photographer until I got to college, and I got a summer job with a photographer who I didn't know exactly what to expect, and he just said, look, I need some help in a cave. And I thought, well, I don't know what this is going to look like, but I'll give it a shot. And what it ended up being is my job was to rappel into caves in Sequoia National Park to help find these newly discovered insects and invertebrates that had just been discovered in these caves. And I was supposed to help this photographer take these pictures. And this is when it first started to dawn on me how photography could be this way of exploring my childhood fascination with the natural world. And so as I started on this journey as a photographic assistant, I started following around my friends in the biology department here at UC Berkeley and trying to photograph their research and photograph how they were studying the natural world and how they were trying to save threatened species like this mountain yellow-legged frog. And this is an experiment by my friend Vance Riedenberg, who had discovered this way of treating frogs that had been infected by a deadly chytrid fungus by bathing them in these little Tupperware containers full of a bacterial solution. I went down to Argentina to photograph my former professor Eileen Lacey's work on these tucos. These are kind of underground rodents, kind of like guinea pigs that live in social groups underground. And I'm kind of just trying to use my camera as a way to learn about different parts of the world, different species across the world. But it's starting to dawn on me how photography can help us see details, complexity, beauty in the world that maybe we didn't notice at first glance. It helps us take a closer look. And in particular, one of the ways it does that is it helps us see details maybe up close in a way that's hard for our naked eye to see. And so an example of that would be this Cuban bee hummingbird that I worked on for a project for National Geographic. And in this particular case, I've trained it to perch on a US penny. And you can see how a still image that freezes the motion of this frantic bird allows you to see all of this intricate color and texture in its feathers that we might be able to notice the next time a hummingbird flies up to a hummingbird feeder in our window, but is a kind of detail that we might not have picked up at first glance. This is another example of how photographs can help us see details that we missed at first. So, we've all heard of honeybees and probably seen, if not honeybees in real life, images of honeybees. Well, for this picture, I was really thinking about how do I show details that we wouldn't have noticed. And this is a honeybee just as it's emerging from its brood cell inside the hive. And you'll notice actually how furry they are. We never think about bees or insects as being hairy the way that bears and lions are hairy, but actually even its eyeballs are covered with almost this like fur-like hairs. Here's another example of a creature that we've probably seen before or heard of before, but maybe aren't used to looking at in this way. This is a ladybug. But really, the most interesting thing about this ladybug is not the ladybug itself, but what it's holding in its legs there. That's the cocoon of a parasitic wasp that just emerged from its body. So in this case, there's a parasite of ladybugs that grows up inside their body and it squeezes its way out. And on its way to growing up, that little parasitic wasp actually has to spin a cocoon, and it's very vulnerable in that state. And what it's figured out how to do is hijack the mind and the behavior of this ladybug in order to force it to stick around and protect that vulnerable little wasp as it grows up into an adult. And this is another example of one of these crazy parasites and how I'm trying to use photography to illuminate really fascinating stories in the natural world and using its power of macro photography to look at these details in a way that I hope draws more attention to their complexity and beauty. So what you're seeing here is an ant that has been infected by a parasitic fungus, which has consumed its body and then burst out of its body with these horn-like structures that are actually its reproductive mushrooms, essentially. And what's happened here is that fungus, when it's ready to emerge and release its spores, it actually has not yet killed the ant. It hijacks its behavior, just like that wasp hijacked the ladybug. It forces the ant to crawl off the forest floor and to the end of a leaf, where it latches on, and then it kills that ant. We never think about fungus being, we think about fungus being this like gross thing in our bathroom or this maybe tasty thing to eat, but we don't really think of it as something that can actually control the minds of more complex organisms like animals. So this was really a fascinating thing for me to learn about, and my camera became this excuse to learn about these incredible complexity in the natural world. And along the way, though, when I was in the Brazilian Amazon to photograph this story, the scientist I was working with, Joao Araújo, actually found an ant that had been infected by a related fungus, but had not yet been killed. And so I had an opportunity to take a video, and what you can see here is in the last few hours of that ant's life, the fungus has forced it to bite the edge of this leaf. It's twitching there with its last bits of energy. And then that fungus bursts through the weak parts of the ant's exoskeleton, like the joints, and you're actually seeing it push out this reproductive stalk that's going to release spores and infect more ants below. And this started to make me think, okay, well, macro photography has this way to illuminate detail and complexity, but actually time-lapse photography lets us see a different kind of detail. It lets us see processes that actually happen too slowly for our eyes to appreciate. And that brings me to this next video, which I don't know, Joe, if you can pull up the B video. I'm going to show you another time lapse. I don't quite know how this, if I'm going to be able to see that. Yes, okay, I can. I can't see the video, but I can hear it. I'll try to describe it based on that. What you're seeing is an egg as it's hatching into a larva, and the larvae swim around the cells, feeding on this white gooey substance that the adult bees feed them, and then they transform into pupa. That's where their head and their legs start to separate. And here's that same pupation process seen from above, and you can probably see little parasites running around. The next step is the tissue that the cells in their head reorganizes. The color develops in their eyes. And then the last step of the process is their skin shrivels up, and then they grow hair. So I'm going to skip over that in my presentation, and really that was a side project as I had started to photograph honeybees for National Geographic. But it was this way in which I started to realize the power of time-lapse photography to illuminate these processes that we don't normally get to see. And that's actually I kept Wes was referring to how this garage is not a normal garage. Well, I actually kept those honeybees in my garage a couple of feet away from where I'm sitting now. But the last kind of thing I want to talk about is how photography is this way. Macro photography shows details, time-lapse photography shows processes, but there's also a way in which photography can show behavior and movement. And so there's a couple of images that I want to share about my hummingbird project that shows how scientists are able to visualize movement. So this is an image of a fog machine that allows scientists to see the airflow around a hummingbird's wings and how they're able to capture the motion of hummingbirds with high-speed cameras. And so this is showing how a hummingbird dries itself off and essentially shaking itself so quickly that the water droplets are shooting off of its body. And the next video that I'd love for Joe to show is how this behavior, these movements look actually filmed with a high-speed video camera that will show the movements of hummingbirds 100 times slower than what your naked eye can see. And this is one that I don't need to narrate. I'll just let you play it, Joe, and what you'll see is hummingbirds shaking and drinking and flying in ways that are hard for our naked eye to see. So go ahead and play that, Joe. All right. Thanks so much. I think I might stop there and leave a couple of minutes left for questions. Are there any questions people have?
Keeping an eye out. Sorry about that. Hey, I'm back in and keeping an eye out for some questions. And as those come in, I've got a few that I definitely want to ask. So as someone who loves your photography and seen it a few times in some of the videos, I'm always amazed by how you're able to capture things at such unique speeds and perspectives. What's the biggest challenge, aside from your, actors, which you can't really control so much, to get some of that footage at those speeds and what you're showing us?
Yeah, I mean, after understanding the biology of the creatures themselves and how to predict their behavior or how to anticipate their movements, it's really the lighting. That's been the biggest technical challenge of, like, how do I get light where I want it? How do I keep light away from where I don't want it? How do I get enough light in there especially for those high-speed videos? So that's where I've spent the most amount of time trying to innovate. And let's see if I can. I have one right here that I've.
See, this is like I said, not your typical garage.
This is the latest light that I've built. And what I wasn't able to share with you today is a project I'm doing right now on jellyfish, which is, whoops, let me set this down here. And I just turn this over a little bit to the side of this garage is actually all jellyfish aquariums. So there's some in here, which I think maybe I have enough time to scoop one out here and show you up close.
I mean, it's incredible to think that you've got jellyfish just, hanging out in your garage with you, ready to be photograph ready for anything you might need. It's also incredible to think about how the different perspectives are that you show us too, from hummingbirds to insects to unexpected zombies to now jellyfish.
Yes. So this project, which I've been working on for about 4 years now, and I've had jellyfish in my garage for 2. They're clear, so it's actually going to be a little hard for you to see in this beaker. Well, nope, not really showing up that well.
I trust. Oh, at the top right by your finger, I see a little bit of a jellyfish.
Yeah, well, all right. Turns out that's been the key challenge of the jellyfish. Is like, these are transparent. So here's another dimension in which a camera can help see levels of detail when the subject itself is transparent. And this is a project where I really think that I'm trying to combine all of the special powers of photography: macro photography to see detail, time-lapse photography to see growth and process, high-speed photography to see motion, lighting to see, transparency. And that's really where I see how photography can support our connection to the natural world. Is like, how can these videos or photos help us go back into the world and say, okay, I've seen this little slice of detail and complexity that I missed at first glance. If I pay closer attention, like, how many more secrets and how much more is there out in the world if I just pay a bit closer attention? And that's really where my work is focused.
So really, in many ways, you've made your camera and the lighting setup a tool for science, along with creating art. And that's really kind of fascinating to think about how it's got those dual uses. And one question that we did get that came in was asking about the equipment you use and what do you use, and is this something that an amateur could try to aspire to?
I'm just looking around to see how well I could show the gear I'm using for this jellyfish project. So for the camera side of things, it's all very, off the shelf. I buy, like a used Canon 5D for a couple $100, very accessible. As soon as you get into high-speed video, it can get more and more complicated. And I'll see what I mean by complicated. I'll show you briefly here.
Yes, we're going on an adventure. This is perfect.
Going on a little bit of an adventure. This is the filming rig I have for the jellyfish, and it's basically a whole bunch of motors and components and like lights that I invented, which in reality are not, each individual component is not that expensive. It's a bunch of computer parts that I ordered off of eBay, or it's used motors that are a couple $100, but it quickly gets pretty complicated. It gets as complicated as you want it to be, I guess.
Right.
And like so it depends. As a starting point, if all you're trying to do is like, how do I look at something a bit more closely? You can absolutely start with a phone and a flashlight, and then go from there in terms of what you most want to pay attention to and what you most want to share with the world. I don't think, I mean, you can go as crazy as you want, but what it's really about is, paying attention to the diversity that's out there and finding a way to share that excitement and discovery with others.
And that's such a good advice point too. Like, you don't need a big camera. It's just about your perspective and looking at things differently and taking the time to do that. We have a question from a 5th grade class, and they're interested to know, were you interested in the art or the science of your work first? What got you, you talked a little bit about, helping out with one of photographers, but was it the art or was it the science that pulled you into photography?
The way I would say that is it started out with the science. I think not so long ago, not so many years ago, I felt like allergic to this idea of artists, because my only experience of art was being dragged to an art museum by my older sister as a kid and just being like, no, I want to see space shuttles and dinosaurs. I don't want to see stupid paintings. And it was boring. And it was just like, I feel dumb being in these spaces and not getting it. And therefore, I think that art is dumb and I don't want to be a dumb artist. Where I am today is really reframing and re-owning that word, in which if art is just about feeling and wonder, in some ways that actually preceded the science. Like, that was the first experience of my childhood, is looking at this thing and feeling a reaction to it and thinking, okay, the only way to hold on to this is science, and is observation, structured observation, and data collection, which I guess would be a broad way of talking about science. So I thought, okay, the only way to access this feeling of wonder in my childhood is science. And then I thought, no, actually, art is the way that I'm doing that. And now I'm like, maybe these distinctions are a little bit silly, and there's not such a clean bucket between art and science. And really, those are two different lenses at accessing wonder.
And that's a great way to kind of explain that too. Like, you've got to have that inspiration point, and then it's also a tool. Like, what you're creating is beautiful, but it also has a function in helping science. So you've melded the two together and really become a showcase of how those two things complement each other. And it's exciting to watch, see, like, just to think about those bees. I've seen that video more times than I can count at this point, and I'm still like, that is incredible. They're doing what? And I notice new things each time. So it's really crazy to think that is, this mix of art and science, and seeing different things, which brings up the last question I'm probably going to ask you, which is, have you thought about using scopes or ways to photograph using different wavelengths of light, so not visible to the human eye, to show more things?
I have, and I did a little bit of work on bats using infrared light, and I think there's a lot of interesting things happening in the ultraviolet spectrum. And I think there's an interesting boundary. I think there's absolutely fascinating work to be done in those fields, but I'm also interested in working not at showing the truly invisible. There's a reason I haven't photographed blood cells or viruses. As fascinating and as important as those things can be, I really like working at this boundary of our human perception. So yes, we can't see as fast as a fancy high-speed camera, but it's showing us something that it's showing us like how much more richness there is if we just squint and hold our breath and look a bit closer. And I think that's the same thing about the macro work, where it's like, yes, it's expanding it, but it's expanding it in hopefully a way that rewards us for looking closer next time. And I feel like infrared video or infrared light or like electron microscopy, it's revealing these things that are never going to be accessible to our own eyes. And there's nothing wrong with that, but there's something less powerful about this way in which you could sort of guide people to look more closely, or reward people for paying closer attention and saying, hey, go back out in the world and look at that bee a little bit closer the next time it lands in your window, or next time that hummingbird comes to your feeder. You can actually tell the little fish scale like iridescent feathers. And maybe you're not going to see as much detail, and you can't see how the wing twists the way that you can in a high-speed video, but I'm trying to kind of point back to what your eyes can see and what you actually can experience without all of this fancy stuff.
Well, and it feels like that's one thing you've been doing with all of your work, is making things more accessible. So not so far that it's unbelievable. That said, some of your work is pretty unbelievable, like the hummingbird. In fact, you can see the wing and like all like. But I love that it's like just a little bit extra. Just stop for a minute, think, remind that there's more to be seen if you just take a moment. And that's my takeaway from seeing your work and talking with you about your work, is that stop, take a look, think about things a little differently, and how can you share that new perspective with others. And I think that's a huge important thing, especially with the Global Biodiversity Festival, because there's so much to see.
Absolutely.
Well, it's been great catching up and talking about the jellyfish, but we're ready to bring up our next speaker. So a big round of applause, everyone virtually, for Anand. And thank you for sharing your amazing garage that's full of incredible equipment to make photos happen.
Thanks so much, Wes. Thank you, everybody.
See you soon.